So the last talk of this morning session is in charge of Delyth Prys, is head of the language technology of Bangor University. And the title of the talk is Getting the Right Terms Out to the Right Users.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll jump straight in so that you can all go to lunch sooner. When I was given this title to be part of the theme of dissemination today, I was a little bit hesitant, to be honest, because like a lot of you here, I've been more concentrated or focused on producing good terminology, on actually doing the standardization work, or thinking, is our terminology of good enough quality? And really thinking that once we'd produced our dictionary, that was it. It's somebody else's problem to deal with the dissemination. But like other terminology centres recently, I guess, we've been under threat of, if not closure, of sort of having funding withdrawn. And we've suddenly found that we need to justify our existence and to prove how important our work is. And there's nothing as good for that as showing how much people use and value your terminology resources. So we've been asking some rather difficult questions, like, how do our funders, because it always comes back to the funders, they have the money, they have the power, how do they understand dissemination? And what about the other stakeholders? How about the end users of our terminology? What's in there for them? And is it part of our role to do this dissemination business? Or is that something that can be left safely to somebody else? You can imagine some of the answers already, and that's a definite no, because we came to the conclusion, really, that we should dabble in dissemination, at least, even if we're not explicitly asked to do so. And we deal with Welsh terminology, and Welsh is a minoritized language, very similar position to Basque, actually, and we heard about the situation with Basque terminology and the Basque linguistic situation yesterday. So a similar number of speakers, similar in terms of being a struggling language community. And we're trying to be part of this broad international world of terminology standardizers and terminology community, and also always trying to play with the big boys in this world. But really, are there separate issues for us? And in the end, how do we measure success? How do we measure the impact of our terminology? And we're a university-based centre. And those of you who are linked to universities nowadays will know that it's everything comes down to impact. It's not good enough just to do the research. You are counted on your impact. And being able to prove dissemination for terminology work, in a way, it's great because you can count the number of clicks on your websites and so on. So these are all issues that we've been struggling with recently. So looking at the funder's perspective, now in a large corporation, they might not even want to disseminate their or publish their terminology lists externally. Ourselves, we've only had one experience of this where the funder didn't want us to publish the terminology list. It was purely for their internal use. We thought this was a pity because it would have been useful for other people outside the organisation. But sometimes you have to acknowledge that if the funder doesn't want to publish their terminology dictionary, it's up to them what they do with it and how they disseminate it. But usually, even if there is a specific audience intended, like we've done a lot of dictionaries for the education sector, and the funder in that case might be thinking in the first place of their teachers and their pupils and the examination boards and the National Curriculum Authority people, or the authors of educational textbooks and the translators. But we know that there's a wider community out there. There are the journalists, the parents, the general public who could also usefully use this terminology. And maybe also, more importantly, you don't want one set of terms to embed in the education sector and then your journalists and your public to go off and use a different set of terms. So you do want to reach as wide an audience as possible. So we have had some success with the public sector, especially if they fund a project, that they do see the sense in getting as wide a currency as possible to that terminology. But anyway, thinking of it in terms of the funder's perspective and being able to argue these things with the funder when we come to scope a project. Then the user's perspective. So many different users, professionals, teachers, students, authors, translators, journalists, general public. And what about machines? Because yesterday we heard some talk about making terminology understandable for machine readable terminology now. And this is a new departure, but I think it's going to become more and more important in the next couple of years. So can they be included? Do we think about them as users? And then can we count the dissemination into, you know, how many machines use our terminology? Interesting questions here. And then think about how users use your terminology. We have this picture in our heads maybe of the translator sitting at their desk with their computer in front of them with internet access. And maybe for them, the website or the web or a web-based dictionary is the best way forward. But we've been working with colleagues in South Africa over the past couple of years, and they've been telling us, well, Delyth, actually, you know, these people don't have electricity in their village. They don't have easy access to the web. We need some other methods of dissemination in order to be able to reach them. So you need to know what the users are going to use. And what we've found across the board, I think, is that fast, accessible, easy ways to get at your terminology are the most important things. And okay, it's a bit humbling sometimes to realise that never mind how good your terminology product is, your wonderful glossy new dictionary, people are not going to open that dictionary if there's an inferior quality product out there, which is just one click away on their computer maybe. So you need to think about accessibility as part of the production process, that you are going to deliver your work in the sort of formats that your users will be happy to use because they're easy to use. And again, coming at it from a minority language perspective, we know that we have this added dimension of wanting as many people as possible to use our products because it's being used for language revitalization. So it's not just a matter of technical communication. I mean, have you heard of the term non-English languages? That's a new one. I think we're all minoritized now, everybody except for English speakers, because it's not just a matter of technical communication. People are going to use the English words unless you can provide them easily with terminology in their own language. So that's another dimension to the issue of being able to get your terms out there. We're really asking our terminologists to do two jobs. One is to elaborate the standardized terms, but also to fill in these lexical gaps in our minoritized languages. That has a whole different set of rules to it, which I won't go into in detail here. But if your terms are new and they're not familiar, and you're in a minoritized language situation, they need a lot of exposure. They say that small children learning a language need to hear a new word about 82 times in order for them to learn that word. I haven't counted, and I haven't seen any literature to show how many times an adult needs to hear a new term before they internalize it. It might be similar. But if you are dealing with these new terms and you don't have a lot of means of dissemination out in the press, for example, for Welsh, we don't have a daily newspaper. So we have an online one maybe, but not a true daily newspaper. So it's difficult to get your terms out there on a daily basis. Some languages might not have a strong presence on television or in the media. And again, it's going to be difficult to get the terms out to them. So your terminology projects are very important in that regard. And here's another problem. Terminology versus lexicography, or specialist versus general language dictionaries. Now, we heard something about this yesterday, and it's obvious that some of our users don't know the difference between a specialist terminology product and a general language dictionary, which is a descriptive dictionary and doesn't try to prescribe what terms people should use, but just offer the language in all its richness. Now, sometimes I think we've been too successful in disseminating our technical terminology, because if you provide a nice, easy-to-use online dictionary or a dictionary app or something that is just one click away, and your general language dictionaries are still paper-based, are maybe expensive, you have to buy them where your terminology offerings are free, your lazy user will click on the terminology dictionary and end up using maybe ugly technical jargon where they should be using a different language register, a more informal or friendly use of language. So should we be mixing our terminology dictionaries with more general language dictionaries? This is something that we've been struggling with recently. And just to show you one example where I guess we caved in to popular demand and produced a hybrid dictionary. This is the Bangor Dictionary, which is an amalgamation of a general language dictionary and a terminology dictionary. And it's one that I've neglected for years because I didn't think it was important, but I've been proved wrong, as you'll see in a minute, so I'll be coming back to this one. And just for you to understand the context of our work, we started off as the Centre for the Standardisation of Welsh Terminology 25 years ago, so not quite as old as Termcat or uzei, but still we've been around long enough to have built up a lot of databases and a lot of experience in the field, and mainly for the public sector, but we've had all sorts of government departments, museums, health bodies, the Welsh Food Agency, environmental organisations and so on. So we have all these different types of terminology. And we have found increasingly that we've needed to advise our funders on dissemination and technology issues, in addition to the standardisation work itself, because they didn't know much about how terms are formed or how they're elaborated or how they're published. And maybe they were stuck in the old paper era, and that's all they understood. And they can't ask for something that they don't know exists or is possible or is inexpensive, because they thought that the new clever technological answers were more expensive than the old paper-based dictionaries, whereas really the opposite is true. And really going down the argument of being able to provide them with a cost-effective product was one of the quickest way to get their attention, really. So we haven't actually produced any paper dictionaries since 2009. I mean, we'd be perfectly willing to do so if we were asked and given the money to do so. But when you think of it, I think the largest print run we had for a paper dictionary was 15,000 copies. So your audience is that size. And okay, it sold out, it was reprinted. Say the reprints sold another 15,000 copies, that would still be sort of tens of thousands of users. And do you remember CDs? When we used to distribute terminology resources on CDs, and at one time we'd have a paper book with a CD glued to the back cover, and we'd distribute the terminology in that way. And that maybe had a greater potential for dissemination because they could load the CD on how many machines they wanted. So it had some greater circulation maybe. But today, even websites are becoming old technology, aren't they? And we moved on, and we had a national portal for terminology, and that's great. You can aggregate content there, so we have over 20 of our terminology dictionaries showing on our national portal, and that's been very useful. At the moment, we find that dictionary apps for phones and tablets, they're the most popular choice. And I guess most of you have a mobile phone in your pockets, and I guess most of you have a dictionary of some sort on it as well. So this again has proved very popular recently. How about pushing out terminology into the translator's workflow? You know, with a traditional dictionary, or even when we go to a terminology dictionary on the web, we pull the terminology out of it to use. But in a translation memory system, if you have your terminology in a glossary, you can push it at the user, the translator, or even the author. And that ensures really that you have consistency of terminology use and that they use the right terms. Now, our databases are very rich in terms of the information they contain, parts of speech, grammar information, definitions, and so on. So really for your translation technology, you need to export maybe a subset, a smaller set. Maybe it's just the source language and the target language, but still a useful method of getting your terminology out there and disseminated and used. And again, we're coming up, well, when I say we have an excellent chief software engineer in our department, and he has lots of innovative ideas. So when I use the royal we, I mean Dewi Bryn-Jones, who is our chief software engineer, and he's come up with some excellent ideas, such as our word-by-word website translator. It's called Vocab, and it uses an API, but behind the scenes, there are two of our dictionaries, the general language one and the largest technical terminology one we have. And because you might not be familiar with this, I'll show you an example. This is the BBC's Welsh language news website. There's a vocab button up on the right-hand corner. You see that vocab button? It's been clicked in this slide, and you can just about see the words in the dictionaries have a little blue underline under them. So you might be able to decipher, if you don't speak Welsh, a guy called Liam Williams, and that's a photo of him there, and he's in a Welsh rugby shirt. And some of you might know that Wales are playing South Africa in rugby tomorrow, and you might be able to work out even that Day Africa is Welsh for South Africa. But you might not be able to work out the words in the middle there. So on the next slide, I will have clicked on the word gefnwr. Let's see. So what's that has done now is to open the two dictionaries, the general language one and the educational terminology one, and it also says that it's the subsection on sports. So it gives you full back, and really this story is about Liam Williams has been selected to play fullback against South Africa in tomorrow's game. So that's another use of our terminology. Okay, so what we have really is one master database. When we do the different products, we don't create forks. All the changes, all the additions are made in one master database, but then they can be published in all these different formats. Lots of projects have their own website because the funder wants their own branding and so on, and there's often more information there. But for a translator or the general user, the one portal, the one-stop shop is where they want to find their terms. So you might have your dictionary app offline, but it can go online to find more information as well, maybe. Offline electronic dictionaries are still useful. And then you have Vocab as a more recent development. And we can also offer API keys for other websites to be able to show our dictionary products. So, for example, this is the website of Llen Natur, which is the Welsh Naturalist Society. We've worked with them to produce dictionaries on plant life, names of animals and plants and so on. If you see right at the bottom there, that's a link into our dictionaries. You can type in the name of a plant or something, and what it does really, it goes to our master database, but it looks as if it's on their website. So we've just provided them with one line of code as an API key, so anybody who wants to do that can access our terminology dictionaries in that way. And just maybe this is an easier way to explain the one master database and the different ways of producing outputs. I didn't put the paper dictionary there, I could have, because that is also possible. Okay, this is the exciting slide for me. Now, I don't usually like statistics, but when I asked our technical guys to tell me how many clicks our products had, because again, going back to this countability thing, if you've got an online dictionary, you can click how many times people have been there. So these are the top 8 products. The national portal, no surprise, that comes first. The Bangor Dictionary, the one I showed you earlier, that was a surprise because I'd been neglecting it. I didn't realise it was so popular. Then Vocab, which you saw on the BBC website, that was 3rd. Then the school terminology, accessing portals through the phone apps, the online methods, and the university one, maybe you would know that would be a more specialised audience. But they're not all from the beginning, I should add, that they've been added at different time periods, so you can't really compare them like with like. But the thing for us, count them all together, and that's over 6.5 million hits. Now, we're a population base of only 500,000 speakers, 500,000 of us. So that's a lot of use for a small language community like that. And also I can show you the figures for this year, since January the 1st until nearly the end of October. And what's interesting here is that Vocab seems to have moved up to 1st place. So really, really being used heavily by people who are learning Welsh, for example. Bangor Dictionary retains its place in 2nd place there. The portal has slipped down to 3rd place, I think because of the popularity of the dictionary app, which isn't counted here as clicks because that's not online, so that's downloaded. I'll come to that in the next slide. But you can see they're going down to the 8th place. This is the little API key that we have on the Naturalists website. But still, you know, for an amateur naturalist society, and where people can, of course, access their terminology through the national portal as well. So this is just their own branding on their own little website. That's very encouraging as well. So just to show you, the total downloads, because we've had to count in a different way now for the dictionary app, it has been downloaded to date 142,000 times, or more than that now. Now that's huge. Go back to our paper-based dictionaries and a print run of maybe of 15,000, so maybe 30,000 being sold. This gets to people that you didn't used to reach before. And anecdotally as well, we hear that if there's a debate in a classroom about what term they should use, it's not just the teacher who takes out their smartphone, it's all the kids to have one as well. And when they do their homework on the bus on the way to school in the morning, and they're writing in Welsh and they don't know the right term, out comes the smartphone from their pocket. I don't think they'd be carrying one of our heavy terminology dictionaries around with them. And I don't think they'd have that connection to the web either. So we have really started looking at these figures and looking at the various ways our work is disseminated. And remember, these aren't mutually exclusive. They can all be used together. So you can count the number of users for all these methods together. And now when we have to report to our funders in various projects, we include these statistics and they report back to their government masters or whoever gives them the money, and that makes our jobs more secure, to be rather mercenary about it. But so I am just going to conclude. This is my last slide. So one master database, multiple applications, needing to educate our funders about how we can use new technology as it comes along. Where will we be in the next 3 or 4 years? We don't know. I think that machine-readable terminology is one way where we'll go, and we'll have to deal with that as it comes. But being sustainable, some of our terminologies go back to the early 1990s. They're still there. They've been reused. We started working before even we had the World Wide Web, but because we'd elaborated our work according to ISO principles and so on, we've been able to keep up with technological advances. So there you are. That's a little brief overview of our work.
Thank you very much. Okay, so any questions?
Very interesting to see how you're connecting different tools to your database there. I was interested in the Vocab. If this is keyboard navigable, so you can use it also for screen readers and people who cannot see the page?
Yeah, we haven't done that, but I assume if you can do it on a web page, you can do it on any text. In reality, we just haven't been used for that functionality yet.
Delyth, thank you so much for that talk, and I identify so much with most of it. I too bemoan the loss of our paper dictionaries, but I accept their day is done, and equally the CDs. However, so what I notice now is we have our terminology website, and we also have our new English-Irish dictionary online, in which there is a considerable amount of terminology, much of which has been taken from our terminology website, and that's fine. And yet, in the new dictionary, because of the nature of lexicography, there's a certain, I think, resistance to technical terms. So in fact, terms are actually labelled technical terms, and then sometimes there's a kind of simplified version suggested in the dictionary. And in my capacity as a freelance editor, I sometimes come across anomalies such as, you know, the writer or the translator or whatever of the book they picked the simple term from the dictionary, which in fact is not technically correct. And more terminology going into the dictionary means that the figures for our terminology website are dropping a bit. I'm not saying hugely, but a bit. So that's my concern, that a certain amount of accuracy is being lost or stepped over in this way.
Yeah, that's why I had that slide about terminology versus lexicography work. We have a similar problem in Welsh. We have a very good English to Welsh large dictionary and aimed at the translation profession. And there you'll have maybe 6 different terms for a technical term, because you'll have all the synonyms in there. You'll even have what we've decided are deprecated terms. But in a general language dictionary, the choice is given on the user, what term they want to use. And of course, translators love it. They love to have the power to be able to choose that term for themselves. In our technical terminology dictionaries, we've taken that choice away from them. We have a preferred term. We might have admitted terms, we might have deprecated terms. But in, for example, the school education system, the authors and the translators are ordered, not by us, by the government, to use the standardized terminology. And I know something similar exists with the government translation service, where translators will not be paid for their translation if they don't use the correct sources that they've been told to use. But the general problem of users not understanding the difference between a general language dictionary and a prescribed technical dictionary, I think it comes back to that. And of course, there are places where you want to give them freedom. You don't want your novelist to be using one of our technical terminology dictionaries, unless they're writing a science fiction novel, which would be wonderful to see all our technical terms in there. But it really is about educating the user when it's appropriate to use which product.
My question is related to translation. Is there a volume of official translations for Welsh large enough to support your terminological choices and the implementation? Yes.
The Welsh Parliament in Cardiff publishes its how do you call it? Like the Welsh Hansard, the assembly record bilingually, and that's very big. And we've used that to create our own machine translation engine. And I know Microsoft have used it to do the Welsh version of Bing as well. So it's a very high register. But we do have, because Welsh is a co-official language in Wales, so in the public domain, public agencies have to produce their documentation bilingually. So you have vast amounts of bilingual documentation, which is handy not just for us to standardize terminology, but for other uses. We do have another national portal for corpora, where we publish a lot of these corpora, because we use them for ourselves when we were doing our terminology searches, because that parallel text corpus was brilliant for us. So we thought we'd publish it online so that other people could use it as well. And that's been quite popular.
Just a short reflection, we'll finish for lunch, but I'm glad we pushed you into this, Delyth. It's an idea you got the possibility to really reflect upon on dissemination issues and questions you've been asking yourself. And perhaps for let's say, bigger languages, there are other issues involved because you have many more actors, and you would have to push into a landscape filled with all sorts of dictionaries of various quality. For a smaller language, there are fewer, perhaps, dictionaries, but there are also fewer competitors in one way. So this is what we need to think about. But yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much for this interesting paper.